Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Tom Rosenberger, Assistant Dean and Director for Online Programs here at Albany Law School. Today's webinar, Culture Shift, HR Strategies to Retain and Motivate Employees in the Quiet Quitting Era, is presented in partnership with Western Governors University. I have just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started with the panel. Closed captioning is available for you during the webinar. You can find the controls at the bottom of your webinar screen. This webinar is being recorded and will be made publicly available. And regarding Q&A, the panel has prepared for you several themes and actionable takeaways, but intends to keep things conversational. So if you do have a burning question that you feel is relevant to the larger audience, please feel free to use the Q&A, and we'll determine as we go when to answer questions or perhaps to save them for the end. While today's event is hosted by Albany Law School and Western Governors University, this ongoing HR in Practice webinar series is offered in association with the Capital Region Human Resources Association, a SHRM affiliate here in New York's capital city of Albany. You may self-report one recertification credit to HRCI or SHRM for today's event. CRHRA offers opportunities to learn and network through their weekly newsletter, events, and a whole lot more. So contact them to get involved. Albany Law School offers 5 fully online graduate programs designed for the working professional, whether or not they have any prior legal education. All programs offer a 9-credit advanced certificate, a 30-credit Master of Science, and a 24-credit specialized LLM for attorneys. Courses are short, so you can choose from 6 start dates per year, and we will work with your organization's tuition reimbursement payment policies. We're excited to present this webinar with the nonprofit accredited Western Governors University. Thank you to our partners at WGU, including Dr. Sean Wall-Carty, who you'll be hearing from today. And welcome to everyone in the audience from the WGU College of Business. Without further ado, let's jump right into the discussion. Quiet quitting, the Great Resignation, career correction. It is time for employers to self-reflect on what is driving workers to seek change in such large numbers. To get things started, allow me to introduce our moderator, Miriam Dushane, Managing Partner at Alaant Workforce Solutions, a nationally recognized leader in helping employers attract, acquire, engage, and retain premier talent. The firm has been recognized by Forbes for 5 consecutive years as one of America's best recruiting firms and has received many prestigious awards. Miriam, thank you for your participation in moderating today's event, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Tom. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for an hour of what I hope you will find is a lively and interesting discussion. If the other presenters or panelists could there's their faces, Robye and Isaac and Dave. Sean, where you at? Need Sean. There he is. Okay. Hi, guys. So I just wanted to start off by saying thank you to everyone who joined us today. I'm very passionate about this topic because I've been screaming from the rooftops that this isn't a new phenomenon, this quiet quitting thing. Like, this has been going on for years. We just have it now has a label that has permeated mainstream media, and everyone's talking about it now. And I guess maybe it's a natural progression from the Great Resignation that we have been experiencing over the last couple of years. So, couple of interesting facts: 22 million people quit their job in the first 5 months of this year alone. So a lot of people said, heck with this, I'm moving on to something else. I'm reassessing my life and my work-life balance and my career, etc. However, millions of others said, just going to sit back. I'm going to do the bare minimum. I'm going to be just collecting my paycheck and seeing how far I can skate, so to speak. So that's kind of quiet quitting. There's a lot of definitions for quiet quitting. So what I'd love to ask the panelists, and I'll go around and ask each one of you, is just quick introduce yourselves and then talk to me about your impression of quiet quitting and what it means to you. So Isaac, I'll start with you. Share a little bit about who you are and where you're from, and then talk about what quiet quitting means to you.
Sure. So I am a practicing attorney. I have a broad-based management side employment law practice. And I'm also an adjunct professor teaching classes sort of at the intersection of employment law and ethics and compliance at Albany Law School. So thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. And in terms of quiet quitting, my thoughts are, as you said, this is certainly not something new. It's just now we have a name for it. And the name could just as easily be disengaged employees, right? Like this is the phenomenon of disengaged employees. And you know, we'll talk much more about this, but I think the fundamental question is, how do we engage employees? How do we make them feel a sense of meaning, purpose, and passion to their work? And once we can answer that question, I think to some extent we address the quiet quitting issue. So with that, I'll pass it on to the next person.
So Sean, what about you? What do you think about quiet quitting and your interpretation of it?
You know, I think about quiet quitting as that moment where management has to self-reflect in terms of, you know, why should that employee stay? Why would they want to stay? Why would they want to work for me? Why do they want to work here? How are we driving, fueling, and engaging? So I think the questions that we ask should be, well, in that relationship piece, well, what keeps you here, right? And how can I do more of that? And so driving that and leaning into the employee, leaning into understanding where they're coming from, I think is where I land on quiet quitting, because you know, to Isaac's point, the other word is disengaged, actively disengaged when they're quiet quitting, right? They're actively working against the goals of the company. They're actively working against that. So I think that we as leaders have to lean into the idea of what has the motivation, how do we bring that out and call it out and leverage that against our goals as an organization. And as you guys said before, my background, I'm a employment law instructor for WGU, and I'm absolutely having a fantastic time here.
Awesome. I was just going to say, who are you, Sean?
Yeah, I was like, wait, I jumped into the question, didn't
That's
answer the
okay.
thing, but you know, I did it in
Don't you
different
worry.
order.
Don't you worry.
You know, it took me a minute to do my hair. That's my problem.
It looks good. Looks really
Thank you. I worked hard.
Yeah, I can tell. You know, the funny thing is or the reality of the situation is that employers need to step up. They need to have some accountability in this. This isn't all on employees. And I think, I mean, I deal with employers of all sizes, of all backgrounds and industries, and it fascinates me to this day, this minute, this hour, that employers just don't want to change. They just don't want to reinvent themselves. This is the way we've always done it. This is the way we're always going to do it. And the hell with the rest of you. Well, I think that's actually now changed, because employees are basically saying, not anymore. We're not doing this anymore. So you're right. We do have to reflect, and employers have to take an active role in making sure that they can fight against quiet quitting, I guess would be my description of that. Dave, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your interpretations of quiet quitting.
Yes, thanks, Miriam. Dave Druzynski. I am head of people and culture over here at Bestpass. We are a software company that focuses on managing tolling operations for fleets, and we also are a mobility payments provider. You know, it's funny that we all didn't really communicate about this before, but our definition of quiet quitting is really all the same. It's not a new thing. It's just basically a fancy way of saying that you have employees that are not engaged. And, you know, we had the Great Resignation, you know, that we experienced. So I think we just need to coin every single thing that comes about. But what I think is really driving the quiet quitting is we had this shift where during COVID, you know, going into COVID, you had employees that were at the office feeling connected every single day. And then all of a sudden we sent employees to work from home. That we told them they were going home for 2 weeks. It ended up being 2 years, close enough. But what happened is we didn't really change, you know, or many employers didn't change the way that they communicate or they engage their employees. They thought that the same old tactics were going to work in the brand new environment, and it didn't. And we're kind of seeing the fallout of that now.
Absolutely. I used to say to people, you know, if managers or a company was struggling as being a remote workforce, they had problems before they ever went remote. It didn't just change because of it. It just amplified it to the nth degree. Robye, how about you? Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you work, and quiet quitting in your world.
Sure. Thanks for having me today. My name is Robye Margolius. I am a career counselor internal at a law firm, Arnold and Porter Kaye Scholer, with offices all over the country, Europe and Asia. My role at the firm is mainly working with associates on their individual career development. So I, understand the management side of this from the firm's perspective, and then also, consider my attorneys my individual clients. So it's kind of seeing it from both sides. And I also work with a team to run the firm's well-being efforts. So to kind of take a different angle, while I agree with what everyone has said so far, I'm going to kind of put in a different spin where we're talking about value, right? How does my company value me? How do I see that value? How is that value communicated? And what value do I see in my own work? And I think that in some ways impacts this idea of quiet quitting. And then from the individual's perspective, sometimes it's about setting boundaries. We had these 2 years, as Dave just said, where we were at home and it was like a free-for-all, work and home, and we were all in the kitchen cooking with the kids. I mean, it was a totally different way of being. And a lot of boundaries flew out the window. And so I couldn't just leave my work at the office because it was sitting there waiting for me. And I think in the kindest way possible, quiet quitting can be seen as a way of reestablishing those boundaries, which really does play into, your professional and personal well-being in many aspects.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about the warning signs. So what should an employer be looking for, or what would they potentially be seeing within an employee or in an organization that may lead an employer to think, ooh, they're not as engaged as they once were. And, it's interesting, Robye, I totally agree with you. I think employers and employees during the pandemic employers didn't encourage employees to continue those boundaries. Our boundaries used to be, we showed up at 8, we worked until 5, we left. That was the boundary. That was the work time. And then when we didn't have those commutes and those things anymore. So are we misinterpreting that employees resetting boundaries to quiet quitting, or what other warning signs might there be? Dave, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I'll actually have a unique take on this one because I'm a big believer in analytics. So I think that there are tools that you can actively implement to proactively look for these signs. So we use a performance management tool that we call that's called Lattice over here. And one of the things that we do in the Lattice tool is every single week it sends out an update to your employees, and it just basically asks them to talk about their highlights and their lowlights from the week. But one of the things that it does at the very bottom, it asks everybody, how did you feel this week? And it gives a range from frown face to smiley face. And then my team will actually go through and look at the reports, and this generates a heat map, on the different teams. And so you'll see that, okay, I've got one particular team that's been red 3 weeks in a row. So you have people that are feeling, somewhere between the frown face and, the in-between face. And so we really try to be proactive about that. So I try to take the gut feel out of it, as much as you can, and, really rely on analytics to help us pick that out.
Gotcha. Robye, what about you? What, you talk a lot about in our our prep for this, you talked, and you just mentioned it as well, well-being. So, what would be a warning sign for you to suspect that whether it's a specific employee, a department, or a company might be experiencing some quiet quitting?
I think one of the things that I most worry about is sort of people going missing, right? If you're supposed to come to the office on a particular day and you're not there, or you're not responding to emails on time, there's kind of you used to be at the social event, whether it be in the office or on Zoom, and you're not there. That's my number one warning sign. It's like a change in engagement, how you engage, and the volume of what you engage. In a law firm, Isaac knows this very well, it's the billable hour. So, and from a data perspective, while it's not tracking your mood, it is a method of tracking how engaged people are on both ends of the scale, right? Someone with very high billable hours could also be kind of not in a great state of well-being because they're pushing really, really hard and they may need a break. And then someone who, has lower hours for a reason that we can't explain. They didn't take vacation, they weren't out on leave. Their deal just, kind of poof up and went up in smoke, or their case settled. why aren't they engaged? And so I try to look to those as early warning signs, because once you kind of, it's like a stone gathering speed down the hill. Like sometimes it's really hard to stop that train.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Sean, what about you?
I think there's several things to look at. Maybe not every company has the metrics to be able to lean into, but certainly the proactive approach is being with your employees where you can, if it's not virtual. If you can manage your employees through performance management, just walking around, seeing their day, looking at their interactions with you, looking at their interactions with others, listening to what others are saying, and sometimes even asking their opinions, right? If you're not really sure and they're giving you short answers, or I don't know, or they're just not really looking you in the eye, you know something's cooking, you just don't know what it is. And that requires that deeper level conversation of that, hey, let's come in for a minute. If it's virtual, it's I would think to regularly schedule meetings with your team. And I know that sounds like a heavy lift. However, that potential heavy lift of maybe 15-30 minutes of just meeting with your virtual team one-on-one, you can get a sense of what's going on with that person, what's happening with that person. And I'm not knocking analytics. I'm all in with analytics. I am. But I think there's a lot of companies that may struggle with analytics, and they struggle with trying to understand, well, what does this really mean? But they get the sense of, I know what it feels like when someone is blowing me off. I know what it feels like when someone is not all in, and they know what that is, and they can identify it and go, okay, let's try to put some measures in place. But I think it's that proactive approach that leaders, especially the leaders, those direct supervisors, have to take in order to start addressing that issue and start looking at that issue before it becomes a major thing.
Right. Yeah. One-on-ones, I think, are really important if you can do it.
If you can do it, yeah.
If you can do it. I have a team of 20, and I personally make it my mission to schedule a half-hour one-on-one with each person every month.
Mm-hmm.
So do the math, right?
Yeah, right.
But,
and if you once a month, yeah.
Absolutely. But you're absolutely right, because then I can go to even their direct supervisor and say, how's everything going with this person? Because I get the sense something's not right. They were a little off with me today, or they said this, or, it's absolutely really super important. Isaac, what do you think?
Yeah, I think the critical thing is to talk to your people. And this is exactly what has already been said. I think it's up to every manager to connect with their employees, whether it's in person, whether it's on Zoom, have that regular call and just get a sense of how they're doing. Like, are they happy? Do they seem engaged in their work? Are they coming to you with ideas the way they have in the past? Have you not heard from them unless you reach out to them? And if so, why not? I think it's just on managers to have those relationships. I mean, really, managers are in the relationship business, right? Like, a good manager is supposed to know their people. And I think that if you know your people and you have your finger on the pulse of what's going on with each employee and their likes and their dislikes and sort of just how things are going generally, that will go a long way to helping keep people engaged. Absolutely.
So let's talk about building that authentic and effective culture. So we all work within different environments. Sometimes that authentic culture comes from the top down. So we could certainly talk about it from that angle, but just talk about, Robye, in your organization. I know you've, if I remember correctly, you're part of is it a well-being committee or something like that you work towards? But talk about the different things that that you've seen that work in building an authentic, effective culture that keeps employees engaged and is in building something that employees want to be a part of.
I was just thinking about how to answer this question, because I think some of it is very different depending upon your organization. And it's really hard I think a lot of people think they know what their culture is, but when you have it reflected back to you, it could be very different. So one of the things I would say is try to have interviews or conversations with people who interact with your company and you as a manager can do this also. Like, how do you see me in this light? How do you see our company? What's our company culture? One of the greatest things that we've done here is people coming from another law firm are called laterals, right? So they've worked in another organization or they came from somewhere else. And when they come in, that's a really great time to reflect on your culture, right? You know what we sold you when you were interviewing with the firm and what we put on our website, but what are you seeing now that you're here because you've been at another organization that looks probably a lot like ours? So I think that's one way to kind of get a litmus test, or like what Dave is doing, like do like a regular kind of test the waters aspect can be really helpful. But being authentic to who you are and leading in a way that is really honest, that you can follow through. So I've heard our chairman speak many times. We have lots of policies and lots of benefits at our firm, but it's the one-on-one, right? Are you connecting with your people? And it's anything different than what everybody's saying, but that one-on-one connection, that idea of psychological safety, as they call it, being able to answer those questions truthfully. How are you? How are you doing today? How's your workload? Comes from leadership. And I think that's a really important thing to do. And if your leadership doesn't know how to do it, it's just not in their wheelhouse, but they're a great leader. That's what the HR professionals or the talent team can kind of step in and say, here are some tools. Here are some questions. Here's some programs we can put on for everybody at different levels to be able to teach them this. It's not, it's not everybody's born with that kind of sensitivity. And it may not have served them in becoming successful in their careers, but we can show them, give them a nice list of questions on how to interact with people to elicit those good responses.
I often find that there is a disconnect between the managers or C-suite, what they think the organization is about, and then when you talk to employees, what they think. One of my rules when I'm engaged with an organization that's looking for talent acquisition services is I need to step on site at your organization. And during the pandemic, that was super hard to do. But we're getting back into that habit again. And sometimes people are like, well, why do you need to do that? And I said, I'm telling you, I've been doing this for 25 years. And when I walk in those front doors, there's a vibe to every company. And you can feel it. It's palpable. It is there. And you can tell just if someone who you're not even going to meet with, you interact in the hallway or on the elevator or whatever it might be. And so it's so true that oftentimes managers think one thing, C-suite thinks one thing, and it is not. They are going like this. They are ships passing in the night when it comes to the culture. So Dave, people and cultures in your title. And Dave and I go way back. I've known him for a really long time. And in my world, Dave's known for helping organizations build that great culture. So what types of things would you share that could help continue to either effectively create an authentic culture, or perhaps maybe address some issues where you got to make some changes?
Yeah. So I think that Robye nailed it right on the head, where she had said right off the bat, first off, you just need to define your culture. So many companies don't take the time to really define that and share that with employees. And that all starts with making sure that you communicate your mission, your vision, your core values. But then beyond that, a couple of things that you need to do is first off, walk the talk. So earlier, Miriam, you had said, what do you do if you need to make some changes? Well, if you have core values that are up there, they're on their wall, they're on the website, and you are yourself, not behaving in accordance with the core values, or say you have that star salesperson that, is not acting like you want, they're not a true part of the culture, and, you're struggling just because they bring in all of the money, and you can't let them go. You just really have to commit to that, so walking the talk. But also, as you had said earlier, now when you talk about that work-life blend, where when does the workday stop and, when does the personal life start when you're working from home, the same thing happens. So before, people always used to talk about, check all of your feelings at the door, anything that's going on outside of work, you can't bring it to work. And, that's blending now as well. So it's really taking time to care about the whole person, not just the worker that you have. So sitting down, taking time to talk with employees, asking how things are going, both personally and professionally, At our organization, our CEO will meet with every single employee once every 6 months for a one-on-one session. We do monthly lunches with employees and ELT members. And we also actually mandate that at least every other week, managers have to meet with every single one of their direct reports for a one-on-one meeting. So it's really about being proactive and taking the time to meet with your employees.
Definitely. Sean, what are your thoughts?
I feel like they're saying everything that needs to be said, right? But I think to everyone's point, it drives from senior leadership, and if it's not driven from there, it's not going to happen. And you made a really great point earlier too, when you said there's a disconnect between C-suite and the street. There's always that disconnect. Why? But there's not that disconnect when C-suite actually meets with people consistently, right? And it's about the relationship. And I think the broader conversation here is really, what is the relationship C-suite has with frontline employees? If you can't answer that question, or you go, that's the problem, right? And so it's
simple, right?
It's simple. And I sit back and I go, wow, all these people get paid to try to figure this thing out. But it's really the simple question of what is your C engagement in with your frontline staff? If you can answer that question, you have the answer to engagement. You have the answer to quiet quitting. You have the answer to retention, to turnover. You have all those answers if you can answer that question.
Definitely. Absolutely. Isaac, any differing or additional thoughts? I mean, there definitely obviously is a common theme here.
Yeah, I don't want to restate what's already been said, but I certainly agree with all of these points, and I'll end there.
So let me jump to a question that we actually got in the Q&A about helping employees figure out, basically helping employees or supporting employees with their own self-assessments, or basically being able to understand when and how they might need to seek support and how to assess their own well-being. What would you say if, or what do you do within your organization that would encourage employees to assess their own well-being and to know when and how to seek guidance or support if they feel that they're starting to run off the rails, so to speak? I'll start with you, Isaac.
Sure. So a lot of employers have wellness resources that they regularly sort of send out to their employees, just so their employees know. It's often a question of an employee is feeling a particular way and they don't know who to contact, they don't know who to talk to about it. They're not going to tell their direct supervisor. But if employers have wellness resources where an employee can literally just pick up the phone and contact someone, or they can email someone, say, I need some extra support, that goes a long way to employees actually doing that. If employees have no idea who to contact, then it's unlikely that they're going to contact anyone. And I find, just sort of due to the practicalities of what it takes to do this, like larger employers with significant resources often have those wellness resources for their employees, where smaller employers where people are wearing multiple hats and your manager might be the head of HR and also running their department or whatever it might be, they tend not to have those resources. In which case you have an individual employee who, the only person they can really talk to is their manager, and they don't want to share their personal feelings with their manager, and they're just not going to. But it makes me, just thinking out loud, it makes me wonder if there are sort of outside third-party providers for this service for employers, because I'm sure that would be very valuable to smaller employers. Larger employers do this in-house.
I mean, I'll just say from my personal experiences, I think sometimes a manager has to be, like we've all talked about, being in tune with their department, their team, their company, whatever it might be, at whatever scale that's at. And then, like, for example, for Alaant, I'm putting in a total, what I'm calling a total mind and body wellness program for next year, bringing in resources, engaging resources. And frankly, I thought the cost was going to be a lot. And after finding people that fit our culture and our organizational needs, It wasn't as expensive as I thought, to the point where I asked the person, I was like, that's a month, right? And they're like, no, that would be for the whole year. And I'm like, whoa. So I would say that there are resources out there. You just got to do a little homework, start asking people, start getting, referrals, those types of things. So Robye, this kind of ties into a question I wanted to ask you about well-being, the different aspects of well-being and how that impacts individual motivation, and then that impacting the overall culture. So do you want to talk a little bit to that?
Sure. So I work in the legal space. The American Bar Association a number of years ago did a study on well-being in the profession. And there's a lot of research on that. You can very easily find it online. But basically what they came up with was a well-being pledge for law firms, legal, corporate practices, and law schools to get involved with. And parts of the pledge dovetail with the different aspects of well-being that they put together. And this is not unique to lawyers. You see this all over when you look for a definition of well-being. There's the physical aspect, the emotional aspect, intellectual, occupational, spiritual, and social. And all of those things are kind of in balance, right? If one's going really well, like you're in great physical shape, that can help support you in your social or your intellectual, or if your career's going really, really well, it might help you with your emotional state and vice versa. The opposite of that is like, if one area is really not going well, it can bring you down. And so what we try to look at in providing resources to our people is I don't know what you need. I'm not going to ask every single person, what is this individual thing that you need? And like you were just saying, you kind of want to put together a menu of things where different people are going to touch upon different aspects. And if your employer's not providing this, you can go out and look for it in your industry, in your community, look for what you need to support your own well-being. But those are kind of the different, what we call pillars. And it's really important when you're not doing well in one to kind of use the resources from the other. The number one I see is social, right? Social cuts across all of them. If you have friends at work, if you have friends who want to go for a walk with you, if you have friends who can support you emotionally, they challenge you intellectually, and they bring up your spirits, right? It's not really spiritual as opposed to like capital R religion, but it's really like, do you find meaning in what you're doing? Either at work or not. And again, we're looking for like the well-roundedness in terms of well-being.
Absolutely. So Isaac, let's talk a little bit about how employees can find more fulfillment in their careers. How does lifelong learning fit into that? And how can that bolster a department or a company's culture if there's support in that?
Sure. So the answer to this is more relevant to an individual employee than it is to a company as a whole, but it's certainly relevant to companies as well. So there is tremendous research out there showing that when employees find a sense of meaning and passion to their work, they are meaning and purpose, I should say. They are more passionate about their work. They are more engaged in their work, and they are just happier individuals in their personal lives because they find a sense of meaning and purpose in that thing that they spend their time doing all day. So I think it's really important for employees, for especially students entering the job market, for established professionals, whoever it is, to keep this idea of finding meaning and purpose in their careers as sort of a beacon, like that should in many ways be the goal. But what happens is, as we grow older, as we change, as we go from single college graduates to married people with kids and whatever, life changes, our sense of meaning and purpose changes. So I think employees need to commit themselves to this idea of lifelong learning, where the path they start out on is not necessarily the path that they need to stay on for their entire career. And if they're committed to lifelong learning, then they can sort of pivot in their career to make sure that their career stays aligned with their sense of meaning and their sense of purpose, what they're doing really sort of stays relevant to their highest goals and aspirations. And if they do that, I think that they will be happier in their career, and they will just be happier people overall. And to the extent that employers can help make that happen, even better.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, come on, happy people create happy environments. It's just like, the saying where one bad apple can spoil a barrel. It's the same concept, right? So Sean, I have a question for you that just came in. So do you think there are different approaches versus older employees and younger employees? So for an example, this person says they were CEO for a company that had an average age of 24 years old. And this individual had to learn how to talk differently to them, as opposed to someone in their own age group, which was in their 40 somethings. So, yeah, I only have like a couple more years and I'm not going to be a 40 something anymore. So I'm like, laughing at even saying that, because now I wish I was like still emerging 40 something. But what do you think? What do you think about younger versus older in an organization and how to communicate with those different age groups? I mean, is that a thing?
I think it's a thing to a point, right? And I think my advice would be, you don't want to paint everyone with the same brush. So it doesn't mean every 20 something wants to be spoken to in a certain way. You can have some highly sophisticated, intelligent 20 somethings that are just old souls and old salts, and they have that appreciation, right? So I think it's really about that individualized approach where you can. And I say that very cautiously, where you can. Because when you approach, like, you can have two 20-year-olds and one is into rap, hip hop and urban, and the other one is very suburban, you can't communicate to that same age group the same way. It's just not going to work. So I think taking a deeper dive, looking at the individual, not just the age demographic that they may sit in, that is a real approach. If you do the blanket of the age, you may not touch everyone in that age group. So I think I would say cautious, be very cautious, focus on the individual. If you're talking about how to engage an employee, it's about that real conversation. That's where I would land on that.
So Dave, let's talk a little bit about our environment we work in. We've talked a little bit about having a friend at work or being in the office or those types of things. But the reality is there's a really large percentage of our population, not everyone, but I would say a good percentage of our population has the privilege and the luxury to work in a remote or hybrid environment. So I know for my team, I go in once or twice a week. My team goes in once a week. So how would you guide employers to engage with employees in a hybrid environment to try to thwart the quiet quitting aspects that could potentially, because you're not seeing them every day, you're not, and possibly not engaged with them every day. So
Yep.
Talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely. And that's where a lot of companies are failing, because they haven't made those changes since employees went remote. So, all of us pretty much to an extent defined quiet quitting as just a lack of engagement earlier. And lack of engagement, as I define it, is really all about losing a mental and emotional connection to the work that you're doing. So I think that there are three things that employers, if you especially have shifted over to a remote environment, should be doing right now that you can help to rebuild that connection. And the first off, and this is actually going to go to something that Isaac said earlier, meaning and purpose. So start communicating with your employees and start leading with a purpose. Remind of your employees of your mission, your vision. And if you don't have a why statement, I always recommend that organizations craft a why statement. I'll give a real quick background on that. There's a great book by Simon Sinek called Start With Why, and it's all about how you communicate from the inside out, and that really inspires people to take action. And your why is really just your purpose, your cause, your belief. It's just really that thing that you stand for at work. I heard a parable a number of years ago that I love because it just perfectly illustrates this. So there was a traveler that came upon three men working. He asked the first man, what do you do? And he said, I'm laying bricks. He asked the second man, what do you do for a living? And he said, I'm building a wall. And he asked the third person, what are you doing? And the response was, I'm building a cathedral. So you had two people that had jobs and one person that was working towards a purpose, but they're all doing the exact same thing. And then next up, I would say, that's kind of just like Robye had said earlier, do employees see the value in the work that they're doing? So if you can align the work that people are doing with the why of your organization, you're really going to rebuild that connection and you're going to inspire people. Next, I also say communicate, and then when you're done, communicate a little bit more. You cannot communicate enough in this environment, and you have to communicate using multiple avenues. You can't just send emails, just talk in company-wide meetings. I think it's really important to make sure that employees know what's going on in the organization, make sure that you're being transparent. When you're communicating, always find ways to weave in your mission and your values. That way you're helping to establish and build that culture. And then when there are changes that are impacting your team members, make sure that you take the time to understand why. Generally when a change is made, if you don't fill in that gap, so if there isn't a why, employees are going to make up their own why. And it's generally going to be one that's formed with a little bit of skepticism or some, paranoia in there. So make sure that you fill those gaps before your employees ever have the opportunity to. And then third, I also say celebrate. Everybody wants to celebrate when you're experiencing wins. So take time to share with your team members, highlight small victories along the way. Make sure to point out how those victories actually help to contribute to the overall purpose of the organization and what you're trying to achieve. But also remembering that as leaders, you can't be everywhere at all times. So you also have to make sure that you set up opportunities for peer-to-peer recognition. We use a system right now called Bonusly that I absolutely love. And what we do is at the beginning of every single month, it's almost like a social media type of platform. At the beginning of every single month, employees are given a number of points that they can give out to others in the form of recognition. So what we do is you go on there and you say, you know what, Sam did a great job on the phone with the customer today. When you're giving the recognition, you have to tag one of our core values in the recognition that you're giving. So it kind of ties back and builds that culture. And then as you're rewarding people, you're accumulating points, and then you can cash in those points for gift cards, Amazon cards. You can actually keep all of them and donate them to a nonprofit charity organization. So it's all about, you're not always going to be there to deliver that recognition. So just set up opportunities for your employees to recognize each other.
That's awesome. I always smile to myself when I have my staff meetings and, unprompted team members are giving kudos to other team members about work that happened that week that goes back to our core values and our mission. So it's a great way to be able to do it. So it's kind of a comment, but I'll turn it into the form of a question that just came in. It says, my company uses stay interviews as a great vehicle for one-on-one communication. How do you guys feel about stay interviews? I see Sean shaking his head and Robin shaking her head. So Sean, what do you think?
Absolutely. Stay interviews is basically, how am I doing? Right? Because it's that two-way street between the employee and the employer. And so the employer needs to reach some expectations of the employee. And we forget that sometimes as leaders. So that stay interview is that opportunity for the employer to go, hey, how am I doing? Am I doing okay? Versus we have those annual reviews that we give to employees. But it's a great venue. I think fantastic. Do it all in.
Yes, but one thing I would caution, I would also recommend is be prepared and be okay with feedback that you as a manager or a leader might not be ready for or might not want to hear, but the reality is you need to hear it so that you can continue to create that culture, right?
Absolutely. I think you have to be prepared for that. Wow, okay, I thought it was this completely off. Okay, we got to redo this. You have to, you have to be open, right? You just can't go in and just check the box. You have to, and be willing to do the work. That's the important part. Be willing to do the work. If you're not going to do the work in the stay interview, don't bother doing it, because it's just going to make people mad. You don't want to do it.
Absolutely. Robye, what do you think about stay interviews?
I think they're a fantastic tool. One of the things that I think people have a hard time with using stay interviews is the idea of confidentiality, right? Are you really going to get what you need to hear if it's not a confidential process? So that's something to think about. If you're doing them for yourself as a manager with your teams, you just talk about it. Or if you're doing it as an organization, where do you invest? Because sometimes you bring in an outside person or you use a resource and that costs money. Can you do it in a way that offers a little bit more of confidentiality so you'll get a little bit more honesty, but it's really important. If you wait until exit interviews,
Yeah, it's too
you've
late.
lost you.
Yep.
And we all know the cost to hire someone new is much more than maybe making a small tweak or two, if you can, to address something that's happening with your current employees.
Sure, absolutely. So we got about 14 minutes left. I encourage people, it looks like people have been sending in questions. I've been getting them and throwing them in as we go. So don't wait till the end. To everyone who's on the line with us, feel free to continue to throw your questions in there. I'm getting them. I can share them with the panelists and we can answer them, in real time. So I'm just going to keep going, but just wanted to make that reminder for people. If anyone is waiting until the end to throw in their question, don't be shy, do it now. I'll just keep throwing them in so we can keep talking. So as an HR person, at the end of this webinar, obviously we're doing this because we want to share our expertise and our experience. And so, Isaac, I'll start with you, but if there was one key takeaway that an HR person or business owner or whoever is watching this could take away, what would be the one key takeaway you would want someone to walk away from this webinar and say, I want to think about that, or maybe I can do that at my company?
Sure. So, look, I think it's easy in these discussions to get very technical and dive into the weeds, especially, with the panelists here. We think about this stuff all day.
Yeah.
I think if you're running a small business or a not so small business, if you're a manager, you want to do right by your employees, you want to make sure you have a positive work environment. Just know your people, just talk to them, be engaged with them. That's quite literally everything we're talking about. That's all it comes down to, is know your people, know your likes, know their dislikes, know how they're doing at work, know what's going on in their personal life, and sort of meet them where they are and show them that you care. And fundamentally, it's so easy to forget. Oftentimes, there's a company, right? And the company is like this thing that the individual employee doesn't really understand so well. Like what to them, the company is their direct supervisor. It's their team. It's the people they're working with all day. If they have a supportive supervisor who knows them, who engages with them, who asks about their family and asks about how they're doing at work and actually cares about the answers, right? And then takes those answers into account in their professional relationship, that's what's going to lead to an engaged workplace. And that's what's going to prevent this sort of quiet quitting issue. If you don't do that, and you're just a silent manager and you're not engaged with your people, then they're going to quiet quit and you're never going to know, because you don't talk to them, you're not engaged with them.
Right, absolutely. Robye, what do you think? Key takeaway. And then I do have a question, but I want to get to I like to make sure everybody answer every question.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with what Isaac just said. Think about what you would want someone to ask you in terms of, how are you doing? What do you need? And then deploy that with your team, because we're talking about different kinds of organizations, different levels of resources. Sorry.
Okay.
And so just really think about what you would want.
Yeah, that's a great point. Absolutely. Dave, what do you think? Key takeaway.
Yeah, so I guess I would say two things. First off, it's culture and engagement isn't something that just happens. If you look at all of these companies that, are winning the Best Place to Work awards, where you see some companies that are really struggling to find employees and others have a waiting list, of applicants trying to get in the door. It's all because people take the time to really focus and think about how they treat their people. And it's one of those things that companies oftentimes put on the back burner because they feel it's a distraction from the business. Spending this much time telling my employees I care about them and working with them doesn't sell more, so they kind of lose that focus. But it's also really about, and I've got my people operations manager shared this with me years ago, and I love it. And it's all about creating moments for people. So I think everybody has heard, the quote, I've learned that people won't remember what you said, they won't remember what you did, but they'll remember how you made them feel. So always look for little opportunities where you can really make people feel special. The one thing that we actually do with all new hires is we have a questionnaire that asks, what's your favorite lunch place? Where do you like to go out for a special dinner? What's your favorite candy? And then they fill out that questionnaire, they come in, whatever they listed as their favorite candy is going to be on their desk with a nice little note from their manager the day that they come in. Costs $2, but it really makes somebody feel special. And so it's really all about creating those opportunities.
Absolutely. Sean, how about you? And then I'll jump to the couple of questions I got.
Yeah, I think it's really about, ABC, always be communicating with your people. I think Dave, that's a wonderful program, something small, $2 thing, candy right there. Just understanding them. It doesn't mean going out, slinging a beer with them all the time. No, but just having an understanding of the person as a whole, not just this work cog entity to shuffle along whatever project we have to shuffle along. So I think always the key takeaway for me would be ABC, always be communicating with your staff. Don't let that fall off, but hear them and take action based on what they're saying.
Definitely. Absolutely. All right. So here's the jump ball round. So instead of going around to everybody, you guys get to jump ball for these two questions because I want to keep us on time. So the first question is, when owners or C-suite put more pressure on HR to hold up company missions or keep company morale high, slowly the staff see through that. How would you manage up? So it sounds to me like they're saying, all the pressure for culture and engagement is put on HR and leadership isn't living by those same standards. How would you recommend that be addressed or handled or managed up, as in the words of the question? Go ahead, Isaac.
So I'm happy to take this one. Look, I think communication goes both ways, right? I think that it's sometimes we see someone in the C-suite, we don't want to talk to them, we're intimidated by them. That can't be the case. And I think oftentimes people are so caught up in the work and producing and delivering and closing the sale, they forget about the people. And I think a critical role of HR is to manage up and to talk to the C-suite and to say to them, hey, listen, you should really consider doing XYZ. You should consider such and such event for the staff. You should consider office hours, whatever it might be, to more deeply engage the staff. Who you can say, like, HR does a lot of this, but we can't do it alone. We need company leadership to be involved. And I think if you have that conversation, the vast majority of leaders are going to be grateful for the conversation. They're going to say, what a great idea, right? And by the way, to make it even more productive, if you can suggest exactly what the person should do, as opposed to saying, oh, there's this vague problem and you need to fix it, that's terrible. That's the worst thing you can say to senior management. There's the vague problem, you should fix it. You should tell them, hey, I've observed XYZ. I think a great solution would be if you sat down with each department head on a weekly basis and had this 1-hour meeting. Can I put it on the calendar, right? And that way your supervisor can literally just say, yes, go run with it, go do it. So now you've come with a problem, you've come with a solution, you're ready to implement. And now suddenly senior management is involved with the employees because of your solution. I think that's the way to do it. So conversation has to go both ways.
I love that. I totally agree with that. All right, so I have another question for a jump ball. Does anyone have a success story about turning around a disengaged employee? I love this question. I wish I had thought of it. So do we have any success stories where we knew someone they had one foot out the door, or they had one foot out the door, but they weren't planning on going anywhere? Does anybody have a story where they can share an experience where they might have turned it around? Dave.
Yeah, I'll share one. I actually had an employee that I had inherited years ago on a team that the CEO had actually told me, listen, this person is going to be on your team, but they're not really that great. I really want you to evaluate them where there just wasn't any confidence. And really what it boiled down to, I sat down, I had a lot of confidence or conversations with the individual. And, it's all about right person, right seat. And so this person was very passionate. They just weren't passionate about the work that they were doing. So we were able to have conversations, find out what their passion is, and then set up a path for them to move on to the other opportunity, because they had the right mentality. They had the excitement, the drive, the skills. They just weren't getting to put those to good use every single day. So it was really just sitting down, having a conversation with the person, getting them into the right seat, and then everything just completely turned around the moment that we were able to do that. But also, I think making sure that you give people chances, because oftentimes, when you put somebody, say, for example, on a performance improvement plan, most people build them with the spirit and the mentality of, this is just going to be documentation so I can get rid of you in 90 days. But really build those in kind of a supportive way, really keep telling employees, here's the expectation of you, here's how your performance is not lining up to expectations, and here's how we're going to support you to get down that path together. And if you build it with that, showing that you care about the employees, oftentimes they're going to turn around.
I think 9 times out of 10, when someone is terminated for a position, it's exactly what you just said. It wasn't the right seat, the right person, the right passion, the right work. And oftentimes it's managing them out rather than managing them in to be successful. So I think that's a really, really good point. Any other last success stories before I throw it back to Tom? We have one more question. Engagement surveys. Do you guys like engagement surveys? What do you think? Got Dave shaking his head. Yes, Robye, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, in theory, I love a good engagement survey. Some of the tough part is getting actual engagement in the engagement survey, right?
Oh, yeah,
it's only as good as your sample size. And so, if you make it a part of your culture, it sounds like, Dave, this is a weekly litmus test that you do, and it's part of your culture, and it's an expectation, and it's quick and it's easy, then that can be great. Oftentimes we do these huge engagement surveys and everybody wants in, diversity and inclusion and the well-being and the talent team and the sales team, everybody wants in, and it becomes really difficult to get enough of a sample size. I would love it if we got 100% participation on these things all the time, but it just doesn't work out that way. So you have to know your audience and know what their appetite is for actually completing the survey.
And taking that data and that input that you're getting and doing something with it. I think a lot of times we do engagement surveys and then it just sits on a shelf and the employers are like, well, what the hell? Why did I bother?
That's really the worst thing you can do.
Exactly. So don't do it unless you're going to do something with it. And with that, Dave, you wanted to say something really quick?
Just one thing real quick. I was going to say exactly what you had said. What we will actually do is take the results of the engagement survey. We actually post that and share that with the employees. And we say, based off of your feedback, here's what we plan on doing different this quarter. And once employees see that you're actually doing something with that data, it encourages others to come forward.
I love it. That's exactly right. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom. I want to first say thank you to the panelists today. Thank you for spending an hour with me. I know I got a lot out of it. I love talking about this. This is the stuff I get really excited about. And I love being able to have conversations with like-minded individuals. And again, thank you all for joining us. And really appreciate your input on the subject. And Tom, back to you, my friend.
Thanks, Miriam. Yeah, same. I'm not going to keep everybody, but on behalf of our guests today, really a sincere thank you to you and to the panelists. You all did a great job sharing your insights, preparing for today. I know that I wrote some things down as a manager, and I know that some of our attendees must have done the same, actionable things that they can take and implement immediately. So I'd also like to extend a special thanks again to Western Governors University, WGU, for their collaboration on making this event possible. And to our attendees, thank you for being here, for giving us an hour of your day, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, everybody.